We are on the record, and this would be in the matter of the State of Ohio versus Michael T. Dixon, 20 CR 0201, and we're back from lunch today. And Mr. Dixon is present along with his attorneys. The prosecution team is here. Deputy Kinneer is on the stand, and the jury, including the alternate, is here. At this point, I gather we can continue with the testimony. Mr. King?
Yes, sir. Thank you. If you, court, would give me just one moment.
Certainly.
And Your Honor, I know, did you want to caution the media?
Okay, I'll do that again. All right.
Since we're back in line.
Yes, thing is, Deputy Kinneer does not want his image reproduced or either by means of photography or through streaming. So no pictures of him.
Your Honor, I do apologize. I'm locating a video that we'll be playing with Detective Kinneer at the moment.
All right. Anybody know why, when witnesses are sworn in, that they do this? I'll tell you why. Back in ancient Rome, okay, if you were a criminal, what they did is they branded an F on your palm of your right hand, okay? So what we're doing today is an old tradition, putting this up so you can see that there's no F on your hand. So this law is full of traditions which really don't matter anymore, but like I said, it's pretty traditional business. So yeah.
Did that mean he was a prior criminal offense? Or?
Yeah, that was if you committed a serious, fairly serious criminal offense, yeah.
Ouch.
They didn't have record systems back then, so that's how they handled that.
They figured you'd carry that with you.
Yeah. Right.
Apologize for that delay. Still having trouble finding the video, but what I want to talk about is we have just concluded the evening interview on the 27th with Michael Dixon. And that's the interview in which he explains a couple different ways of what happened. Did you in your office then take what he told you and try to validate that information in the coming days and weeks?
Yes, we did. And actually, I knew by going into the residence already some of the information that he was saying was not true. The location of the TV itself and how he was standing and how Mr. Whitaker would have been standing at the time of the shooting did not match up with damage being caused to the TV, because the TV would have been directly behind Mr. Dixon at that time to his right, and the shot would have gone in front of him at Mr. Whitaker, so in a totally different direction. So we knew the TV was not part of that.
Okay, and you knew this because you had visited the property and seen the layout?
Correct.
And then applied his example to that layout from the foundational knowledge that you had?
Correct.
Some of the questions that you asked and that Detective Downs asked targeted whether or not Melody Dixon was involved. And his answer each time was what?
No.
Did you take his word for it?
No.
Was Melody Dixon interviewed?
Yes.
I want to talk about her initial interview that took place on July 27th at around 4 o'clock at the Frank Species house. Now, sir, if you had been in the courtroom earlier this week, you would have known that there was an interview, your initial interview with Michael Dixon took place on July 27th at 4 o'clock at the Frank Speece house. Is that right?
That is correct. Melody's would have been just prior.
Okay, thank you. So we had an initial break in that interview where for 40 or so minutes, Mike Dixon sat on the trailer. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and what was happening in that time period?
At that time, prior to that interview, I was actually interviewing Melody Dixon in front of the Frank Species. She considers him her grandfather, his residence itself, and I was questioning her in front of the front door.
Why did you question her first?
Actually, I did.
Why did you?
Why did I? Oh,
Yes,
I'm sorry.
I'm going to take the mask off. Sorry, I forgot to do that. Yes.
Yeah.
Why did you question Melody Dixon before you interviewed Michael Dixon?
I wanted to basically always separate the two individuals, try to see what kind of a story they're going to give you, see if it's substantiated with the other, see if there's any difference in the stories itself. That is why. And I wanted to find out her side of it, where Mr. Whitaker was, what may have happened to him, the days that led up to our actual interview.
I want to talk about explicitly the things that she said, the things that she responded to when you questioned her about where James Whitaker was and what happened. Specifically, did you ask her if she knew where James Whitaker was?
Yes, several times.
And did she say that she hasn't seen him and hasn't seen him since the 5th of July?
That is correct.
Did her story about what happened or that she hasn't seen him since the 5th of July match up with what Michael Dixon said initially?
Somewhat, yes.
That upon returning home late at night, they found that James Whitaker wasn't home and had taken some things with him?
Correct. The only thing that was buried was she indicated that the 65-inch TV had been gone for some time. Mr. Dixon would indicate that it has actually disappeared that after they arrived home that early morning hours.
But what she explained was, again, that James Whitaker had already left.
Correct.
She didn't say anything about anyone shooting him
No.
or about him attacking her.
No.
Does she talk about the gun being missing?
Yes.
Do you remember what she says about the gun being missing?
I believe it was just that the gun was gone. No explanation of where it may have gone or anything like that. It was just that he had disappeared along with that. She also indicates that he was suffering from depression. Later into the interview, she would actually tell me about a note that had been left behind that potentially indicated that he was contemplating suicide.
And did she offer that note as an explanation of where he might be?
Yes. And during the interview, she even indicates that James Whitaker had told her that there may be a time that when they come home, return home, that he'll just be gone and it'll be all right for them to remain to live there.
Did she say something to the effect of that I think he just took off and that she's not going to be here and that, or he's not going to be here and that you guys can have the place or live there?
Yes, that's what I'm referring to.
Okay.
Your
Yes.
Honor, may we approach please?
Yes, you may. We're going to take a short break here to try to clear up some of the technology problems we're having, so it won't last very long at all. But as I've told you earlier, do not discuss the case among yourselves. Do not permit anybody to discuss it with you or in your presence. It is your duty not to form or express any opinion on the case until it's finally submitted to you, and we'll see you back in about 10 minutes. Thank you. On the record, case is State of Ohio versus Michael Dixon. Everyone's present, including the defendant. The jury's present, and I believe we fixed our technical problems. So go ahead, Mr. King.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Detective Kinneer, for your patience. Thank you all. We were discussing an interview that you had with Melody Dixon. I'm going to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit EEE. Just like the preceding videos, I'm going to play just the first few minutes of it for you to identify what it is. Can you tell me what the top right watermark says, sir?
It says 2020, which is the year, 07, which is July 27th. Time is 1600, which is actually 4 p.m. So July 27th of 2020.
There's a gentleman on to the right-hand side of the screen with some plaid pants on it. Do you know who that is?
That's actually Mr. Michael Dixon, the defendant.
Or anything on you, no poke, hand, nothing like that. Do you have any infectious disease we need to know about? Hep C, MRSA, anything like that? No drugs on or in yet?
Nothing in your shoe.
What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna walk you over here to this pine tree so you can stand in the shade. Detective Kinneer is gonna go inside, talk to your pops real quick, okay? Is he able to come to the door? Your daughter? All right. He's in there?
Yeah, it's okay. Mike's got a warrant on it, Fairfield. I think it's Fairfield.
Can you identify who the gentleman is that we can see the video?
That's Frank Species, the stepdad of Michael Dixon. Here. Anyhow, we're going to take him in and he can get it worked out. Okay. Is Melody here?
Melody. Go back.
Screen. It looks like a blue and white dress to the right side of the image. Who is that?
That's Melody Dixon. That would be Mike Dixon's daughter.
At this time, do you start to ask her questions about the missing person, James Whitaker?
Yes.
Yeah, if you would. Thank you. Melody, I'm Detective Kinneer with the Ogden County Sheriff's Office. I'm gonna take this thing out of my ear for a second. Mike has a warrant out of, I believe it's Fairfield, for failure to appear on something. We only know that there's a warrant for him, so once we get him back to the office, he'll be served, and then we'll go from there. I need to ask you about where you were staying at before, the Whitakers.
Before him? Before the Whitakers?
No, at Whitaker's. You guys left here the other night. The family come down, they talked to you. What happened there? How long have you been there?
Can everybody hear? Can everybody hear this? Okay, all right, good. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Your Honor, I'm not sure if you're back there. Are you able to hear, ma'am? Okay.
Judge, I'm going to play it the next few seconds and we can do another test.
Okay.
And you left this.
You able to hear me?
You can't tell what he's saying clearly.
Judge, if you don't mind, I'd like to play a little bit of it. See if we can
Okay,
because it might clear up, and if it doesn't, we might ask some of the jurors to be able to rearrange.
Sure.
At least the viewing of this. It's a short video.
And, so you guys came here, then to just stay?
Yeah. We
Where's
take this
Mr.
out.
Where's
And
Mr. Whitaker at?
we haven't seen.
So we all can hear. What was that question you just asked?
Where's Mr. Whitaker at?
Last time we seen him was 5th.
Was the 5th?
Yeah.
Where did he go?
He was at the house, and we went over to our friend Kenny's, and we came back around 5 a.m. because we were over there for a while. Dad works with Kenny a lot, and he wasn't home.
What was her answer to where is James Whitaker?
They left, and when they returned, he was gone. They went to Kenny's,
And they returned about 5 o'clock in the morning.
5 o'clock in the morning.
Now, was that consistent with Michael Dixon's initial story?
Yes,
Was that inconsistent with his later interview on later on this evening?
yes.
He just wasn't there.
So was it on the 4th then that you actually left? Or was it the 5th that you left and then he came back at 4 a.m.?
I'm pretty sure it was the 5th that we left, and it was like very early in the morning when we came back.
So you came back on the 5th of July at like 4 a.m.? 5
4 or
a.m.?
5.
4 or 5. And you went to Kenny's? When you say Kenny's, is that Amarai? Did James say where he was going or anything? No, that's his first name, just that I know him by. Mr. Whitaker, put it that way. What do you know him by?
Jim.
Jim?
No, he didn't really say he was going. He was just, he's been upset about a lot about Jessica. And he was going off one night about her. You to Jessica.
How's his wife?
What did she say Jim was upset by?
He's upset about Jessica, and that would be his daughter.
You asked if Jim said where he was going, and did she have a response?
No.
His daughter.
His daughter? Oh.
They got in a fight one night.
Oh, okay. I knew his wife passed away some time ago, maybe a few years ago. Diane. So he was mad about Jessica?
Yeah.
What was that about?
She came over like drunk a while back, and she said, "Come on, Dad, you're taking a ride with me." And when he came back, everybody thought he was mad and said he was going to effing kill everybody, and he was going to kill himself. He's tired about it all. I mean, Dad usually just ignore it because he usually doesn't act on stuff like that. We figured that he just, left. Didn't say anything to anybody. Talked to his friends, and they said, well, don't report him yet because he might not want anyone to know he's gone at the moment.
And did he say anything? I mean, you say that he talked about killing himself.
Well, he talked about it, but he never
Did he do that often?
Yeah. But he was, like, depressed, so.
And what time did you guys leave?
Kenny's house?
Yeah, what minute?
Well, we got back to the house around 5 something. So
We left before though.
I don't know, because we used to go over to Kenny's in the evening, so probably like 1 or 2 or
1 or 2 in the afternoon.
Might have been.
We can't see her face, but you said 1 or 2 in the afternoon. Has she given you a verbal or a physical confirmation?
Correct. She's indicating to me that it's in the afternoon, not at the evening, as will be told later by Mr. Dixon.
I don't know. We go to Kinneer's so much. Like, we even went there the day before that. Around that time.
And so you guys have been there since the 5th by yourself?
We talked to some of his family members and stuff, and they didn't tell us to call anyone.
What happened to some of his stuff?
What do you mean?
Like his guns, his TV set, all that?
Well, the gun was been missing, and I don't know about the TV. But we know that the gun had been missing for a while.
Yeah, been missing for a while.
What gun is she referring to when she's saying it's been missing for a while?
Well, she's saying his gun, so I can only assume by that it's the Remington 1100.
His gun is Jim Whitaker's gun.
Correct.
And it was missing. Jimmy had 2 guns. One of them went missing before I even came there. And the other one went missing the time he went missing.
What were they?
I don't know. I don't know about guns.
Would you say they're long guns or handguns?
Long ones.
Long ones? And the TV?
I don't really know about the TV. I have one downstairs, it's mine.
Yeah,
But
this is like, they told us it was like 65 minutes, the big TV. That's sitting outside, or sitting in the house, I guess, or whatever.
I don't even know, to be honest with you, because
I mean, did there used to be a TV there, there a big TV that you guys would watch?
there was TV up there, but no one ever turned it on or watched it.
Okay.
But we always had a friend come over, and he stayed the night all the time. He always left before we got up. His name, I only know his first name.
So,
Keith.
Keith?
That's that. I only know his first name. So.
What's Keith look like?
Maybe by your height.
Yeah.
He's 38. He has a daughter who's 9. Brownish blonde skin hair. He was with the family the day they came over yesterday.
Okay. So he comes over once in a while?
No, he can't used to come over and stay the night every night because he missed curfew with his parents or something.
Do you think that something's happened to Jim?
I think he just took off because that's what he's been talking about for a while.
Where would he go?
Well, he told me and Dad, he's like, I'm just gonna not be here when I'm there. And you guys can keep this place because my family know that they're going to do about me.
What did she explain that Jim Whitaker had told you and Michael Dixon?
That someday that he might just be gone and they can just keep the place.
Or whatever, so.
I mean, where would he go?
I don't know. I thought he went and just did something to himself or something. That's what he's been talking about. And
Do you have any idea where he would go? Did you guys try to find him?
yeah, we looked. He usually takes walks around his property. Sometimes we went around his property and find him, try to call him, and get a hold of him. We talked to Dustin. Dustin couldn't find him. I seen this. My brother Craig looked for me.
So you guys called Dustin,
Yeah.
and then Dustin come over looking for him?
No, Dustin came over because I was rolling all the time, does yard work for Jimmy. And he's like, where's Jimmy? And he talks to me. We don't know. And we all looked for him around the house. And then we started calling people. We don't know where he goes because I don't really know him. He doesn't really talk that much. I know where he's gonna go or whatever. I personally wouldn't know where he'd go though. Besides, like, just walking off. Because he doesn't have a vehicle.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, how would he get anywhere? Because every time I've seen him, either working on a car that's broken down or just broken down, and last I knew he didn't have a vehicle.
Yeah.
I mean, where would he go?
Oh, I don't know. He'd always have us driving somewhere.
Yeah. You think something's happened to him?
I don't really know that because last time I seen him was 4th, 5th.
Okay.
And we left the house and he was still there. When
Still there.
we came back, he wasn't.
Did you take any of his stuff? Any clothes?
I don't think so, but I think to his gun. His gun doesn't be there anymore.
What kind of gun?
It was a long gun.
Long gun?
That's all I know. I don't know what kind it was. Is he going to jail?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Because there's a warrant for you. Not a Fairfield. Yeah, I'm not sure. I believe it was Fairfield is what they said. But I can't swear to that. They just told us there was a warrant for him. Come pick him up. Was that the only thing that was going on?
To my knowledge, but I can't say. I know for definite because I don't.
We don't know that any clothes or change clothes or shoes or anything like that. Anything that stood out that was missing after you guys got back.
His clothes were all in his room.
Where did he stay at?
Sometimes he's been sleeping out on the porch, but he has a bedroom.
So, where did he sleep at on that? Did he sleep on that couch that's outside?
Yeah.
Anything unusual when you guys came home? Don't you think something may have happened to him? Or
Just the fact that he was gone. He didn't say anything or even write anything. Because he usually never left without writing a note or whatever.
where he was going to be at, be back at whatever time, whatever?
And it's the only thing that really stood out.
So you guys he didn't leave a note?
He did leave one, but Dad had it put on a white cabinet. And so something about he doesn't want to live anymore because of the love of his life or whatever.
Yes.
What did she say was in the note?
Basically, she's starting to discuss about didn't want to live, indicating that it's basically like a suicide note. So what she's trying to describe to me.
Did it also indicate that Jim Whitaker was in love with her?
Yes.
I gave it over, and I just gave it back to him and put it on a white cabinet, walked up the stairs, and I pushed up against the wall in the kitchen.
So,
It should still be there.
still cabinet,
Yeah, and it's like, the paper is like pink paper.
pink paper. Do you think that he was capable of harming himself?
I mean, the way he talked about it, but never acted upon it before.
I mean, it's something that you think that he was just kind of trying to get sympathy for, or just that he was depressed and saying things like that just to get him out and be able to talk about it.
Well, he said it all the time.
Said it all the time?
Consistently, yeah. And I'm like, so I'm like, I mean, he took medication, but yeah, more. The way he talked to was like, I was getting more live or something.
Well, let me just tell you, if you know something that happened to this guy, you can help us find him. Now would be the time to do it. I mean, if it turns out that something criminally has happened to him, and you knew about it, then you could actually be charged with that as well. Complicity. I mean, so right now would be the time to tell us while we're standing here talking. But help me to find Joe and these critics family's arrest where he's at. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if they could have his body to bury him?
Stopped it at 17 minutes and 38 seconds. At this point in the investigation on July 27th at around 4 or so in the afternoon, how would you classify the investigation?
Classified it as a missing person under suspicious circumstances.
So you're looking for Jim Whitaker?
Correct.
Did these answers that she provided in that 17 minutes, did those answers impede that investigation and your search for Jim Whitaker?
Absolutely.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Cross?
Thank you, Your Honor. Afternoon, Detective.
Good afternoon.
Now, I'm going to be obviously asking you a series of questions. Your testimony is kind of going over 2 days. So I'm going to try to kind of go in order of the testimony that you gave. Is that fair?
Sure.
Okay. Now, yesterday, you were giving testimony about July 25th. Do you remember that? I believe you were speaking to other individuals on July 25th.
26th. Sunday's the 26th.
Was that when you were speaking to the family, et cetera?
Correct.
Okay.
The 25th, I believe, is a Saturday. The 26th is a Sunday.
Okay.
26th is the day that I got involved at
Okay.
the request of Lieutenant Champ.
That's right, because another officer was there on the 25th, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So on the 26th, you talked to the family. Did they inform you that Mr. Dixon was told to leave?
They didn't say that he was told to leave. They indicated that they had told me that they told him that the police were on their way, and then he and his daughter, Mr. Dixon and Melody Dixon, left the property hurriedly.
Would it be surprising to you to learn that we heard testimony that they, in fact, demanded that he leave?
No.
Okay.
I can only state what I was told.
I understand that. But obviously it seems a bit different if he was told that law enforcement was coming and hurriedly left, and he was told to leave and then in fact left. Those are two different situations, correct? We can agree
Yes.
on that? Okay. Now you also made some statements, or at least in reference to some questions asked by the state about how Mr. Dixon, the defendant, did not come in and immediately, tell you what was going on. You recall that?
Yes.
Okay, you recall those questions. It's not atypical for a person who has a warrant for failing to appear to not just wander into a police department, correct?
Correct.
Okay. It's not atypical for that sort of person to avoid, in fact, coming into contact with police. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So there wasn't really anything specifically unusual about a person who had a warrant not actively seeking out law enforcement, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And when you, in fact, when we just saw the video of that would be on the 27th, correct? When you served the warrant on him?
Correct.
All right. And when he was arrested, he was compliant, correct?
Correct.
Didn't resist you in any way, right?
No, he did not.
Okay. And in fact, when you were told that you were there, when you told him that you were there to arrest him, his response was simply, okay, correct?
Yes.
And gave you his hands to put handcuffs?
Correct.
And then went exactly where you directed him, correct?
Correct.
I believe that may be an interloper. So, despite the fact you may have been dissatisfied with some of the answers, he was ultimately compliant with all of your requests at that time, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you were also asked questions by the state about when you initially asked him what was going on at the Whitaker residence. Your question to him was just simply, what happened at the Whitaker residence, right?
Yes.
Okay, it was a general question, correct?
I'm trying to gather information.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And you didn't ask him a specific question, just simply what happened at the Whitaker residence, right?
Yes.
And his response was generally that he had been told to leave by the family, correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's a reasonable response to that general question, right?
Yes.
And then he talked about living there for 2 years, right?
Yes, year and a half, 2 years.
Approximately, correct. Which seems like a reasonable progression to that conversation, correct?
Correct.
And then he said specifically that he went to Kenny's house that night and then returned about 4:30 a.m. the following day, correct?
Yes.
All right.
4 to 5, I think it's.
Right. Generally 4 to 5, 4:30, somewhere in there, correct?
Yes.
And when the state asked you a question about that story, you had said that that seemed unusual to you. Is that right?
Well, the dates, he was having trouble with the dates themselves. First, it was possibly the 5th, the 6th, going back to the 4th. And then he didn't seem to understand and make the reach between the actual date change regarding if you left on the 4th. It's actually now the 5th at 4 or 5 a.m.
Okay. So it was really the time and the dates that seemed unusual, not those general progression of answers to your question, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
It was confusing.
Understood. Now, I want to sort of fast forward to the interview with Detective Downs, or former Detective Downs. And I should say, before we get to that point, throughout this, obviously, as we go through this time progression, you are similarly, as we watched on video, learning all of these facts as we go, correct?
Which are you referring? I'm sorry.
As we sit here today, with the power of hindsight, you now know the beginning and the end of the story,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
But as we're watching these videos, you're learning it in real time, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So while you were answering some of these questions about that progression, you are now answering essentially from the hindsight of having heard the confession already, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
At the time, we're gathering the information, and I'm just trying to sort out facts, evidence with statements.
Absolutely. So fast forwarding to the interview with Detective Downs that we watched, you obviously weren't there for most of it, but you were watching from another room, correct?
I was watching from the other room for the interview.
Right. You were not in the interview room yourself, correct?
That is correct.
Right. And in responses to your questions from the state, obviously their questions were talking in many ways about inconsistencies that you were hearing or seeing as we had this progression of story, correct?
Yes.
Now, how many years have you been a detective, sir?
Actual detective for about 30 years.
30 years. And presumably involved in law enforcement even longer than that, correct?
39 years.
Okay. Very long time.
Very long.
And presumably at this point, if you are the lead detective on a murder investigation, you've seen every type of case there is out there, correct?
I don't want to say I've seen every type of case, but I've worked a lot of cases.
Okay. Fair to say you have a vast experience in a variety of different cases, correct?
Yes.
This is not the first case where you've interrogated somebody about a crime they may or may not have committed, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And this similarly isn't the first case you've had where while interrogating that person, they haven't initially been forthcoming with what happened, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. In fact, one might even say it's typical that when interrogating somebody, they initially are not forthcoming. Is that an accurate statement?
I've done a lot of white collar crime where I'm working with, if I go back to my board of pharmacy years, I'll say that those type of people have a higher moral character. So I've heard a lot of confessions right off the bat.
Okay.
Out of those 22 years.
I should be probably more specific with my question then. In crimes that are not involving financial crimes, non-financial crimes, we could even just go with any crimes involving a killing. It's not atypical for somebody to not initially admit to the killing. Is that correct?
That is true.
Okay. So while Mr. Dixon clearly in that initial video did not admit to any killing, it wasn't unusual for him to then later admit. Is that correct?
I'm not going to say it's not unusual, but the way that it was being laid out was unusual.
That's fair. Now, you had a separate detective, in fact, come in and do a second interrogation, correct?
Correct, Lieutenant Ed Downs.
And that's because you didn't believe the initial story, correct?
That is correct.
So it was almost your expectation then that there'd be more details to come out, correct?
Yes.
I asked that in the sense that you're not surprised that his story changed, correct?
I didn't believe much of his story that he had to begin with.
Okay. The second story sounded far more reasonable to you, correct? Strike that, Your Honor. The second story sounded more reasonable than the first story, correct?
It had more details, but yet still, the evidence that I knew at the time, it still was not adding up. So I knew that it was not correct.
I understand that. What I'm saying is that the second story sounded more reasonable than the first story, correct?
Has an answer, Your Honor?
He didn't actually answer that question. He sort of answered around it.
Overruled. Why don't you answer it?
I'll say that I knew that there new additional information would come out, if that's what you're asking.
It's not, Detective.
Okay, please ask it again. I'm
Certainly,
sorry.
that's all right, Detective. It's really, you heard two different stories, right?
Correct.
And while you may have believed that there was more to it, the second story sounded more reasonable than the first story.
I don't agree with that.
You don't?
I didn't believe what was being said from the beginning, and the second statement that he was making, I still do not believe what he was stating.
Okay. So when he stated that he in fact did kill Mr. Whitaker, you didn't believe that?
I believe that,
Okay.
but not the details.
Okay. But if we're going to be weighing two different stories, certainly a story in which he says he has no idea where Mr. Whitaker is.
Can we approach, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, once again, getting back to the interview with Detective Downs, and even taking in the totality, there were certainly some consistencies between his stories, correct?
Yes.
Okay. In fact, he had said that he was at Kenny's house from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., between 4 and 5 a.m., correct?
Correct.
He said Melody was asleep in the car during that time, correct?
Pickup truck, I believe, but yes.
Sure. Those were both consistent, correct?
Correct.
He said that this happened in the kitchen, correct?
Correct.
You followed up in this investigation beyond, obviously, these interviews, correct?
Correct.
His admission that this occurred in the kitchen area was consistent, correct?
Correct.
He said in that video that at one point, Mr. Whitaker attempted to grab Melody, correct?
Correct.
Okay. He also said that he admitted to disposing of the body in the burn pit, correct?
Correct.
That was consistent, correct?
With the evidence we found, yes.
Okay. He had said fairly consistently that it was only him, right, who did this?
Yes.
And not Melody, correct?
Yes.
And that was his consistent statement, correct?
Yes.
Okay. He said that a gun was pointed at him, correct?
He did.
Okay. And though, again, we saw the video, he told Detective Downs and then also Detective Downs and you various configurations about where people were, but he was consistent that a gun was pointed at him, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And he said that the gun was in James's hand. That part's consistent, correct?
Yes.
He was consistent about the fact that Mr. Whitaker was hit in the head near his eye area, correct?
Correct.
And that was consistent, correct?
The sides did change, though.
Okay. He did say, though, the location relative to where his eye was, right?
Correct.
Okay. And that was consistent, correct?
Yes.
Okay. He also said that he told Melody to go to the basement, right?
After the shooting.
Correct.
Yes.
And that was consistent, correct?
Yes.
Okay. He said he cleaned up everything on his own, right?
Yes.
And that was consistent, correct?
Yes.
He said that he used bleach, right?
Yes.
And that was consistent, correct?
With what we found, yes.
Okay. He said he used a sled to move the body, correct?
A deer sled, yes.
Pardon me?
A deer sled?
Okay. I'm sorry. I don't remember him saying the specifics, but he did say a sled. Correct?
I know it to be a deer sled.
Okay. A black sled, right?
Yes.
And that was consistent, correct?
Yes.
With what you found, right?
At the burn pit, yes.
Okay. He admitted that he was using methamphetamines, correct?
In the last interview, yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then that was consistent thereafter, correct?
Yes.
He admitted that he used accelerant at the burn pit, correct?
Correct.
And
Different types, though.
Pardon me?
He indicated initially it was diesel, then later it would be camp fuel,
Okay.
like Coleman fuel.
Okay.
We found a can of that, not the diesel.
Okay. Both of them are fuel
Accelerants.
of some kind, correct?
Yes.
And both of them are accelerants, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that part, at least the admission of using an accelerant was consistent, correct?
Yes.
Okay. He also admitted to piling stuff on top of the fire, correct?
Yes.
Admitted to piling his stuff on top of the body to ensure that it burned, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. That was consistent, correct?
Correct.
So, while I recognize that there was certainly a difference between the first interview and even the second interview with just you and what he said with Detective Downs, when he finally came clean with Detective Downs, thereafter his story was fairly consistent. Is that accurate? With all those things that I listed?
At the end of the various stories, yes.
Okay.
But it's not consistent with the evidence.
Okay. But his story was consistent thereafter, correct?
Yes.
Based on all those things I just read off to you.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you also talked about the TV, right?
Yes.
And there was a story about when or where, what happened to the TV, correct?
Yes.
And initially he did say that it was placed on the burn pile or something of that nature, right?
That is correct.
And then you testified that you later found out it was given or provided or somehow made its way to Jeff Amarine, is that right? Or Amarine?
Amarine, it was traded for a small motorcycle, mini bike, Bluetooth stereo, and I think a speaker.
Okay.
So it's traded.
That's what Mr. Amarine told you, right?
That is correct. And we did find the small motorcycle in the garage at the Whitaker residence.
Okay. Would surprise you if Mr. Amarine testified otherwise here?
I can't say that what I don't know.
No, I'm just saying would surprise you.
No.
Okay. Now, Mr. Dixon mentioned specifically at one point why he didn't mention his daughter, with the reason being that he wanted his daughter left out of this. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think it's possible he also felt that way about Mr. Amarine?
Yes.
Okay.
Objection, Your Honor.
Need to approach. All right, I'm sustaining the objection, and you're to disregard the last question and answer.
Moving ahead slightly, or I should say, I guess in time would be moving back, but moving ahead in your testimony, you interviewed Melody before you interviewed Mr. Dixon, correct? On July 27th at Mr. Specie's house?
Correct.
Okay. Now, when you initially testified yesterday, you had indicated that when you first arrived at the residence, you were there. Let me rephrase. When you arrested Mr. Dixon, you were asked why you had arrested him, and you said that at the time it was only about the warrant. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. But you were in the process of your investigation at that point, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So while you arrested him on the basis of the warrant, you were still engaging in this investigation with both of them at that time. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Melody, the question was asked of you during her statements. Was her statement consistent? You said it was consistent with Mr. Dixon's initial statement, but obviously they both sort of evolved later on. Is that accurate?
It's consistent, but yet the times are different. So there's variations.
Sure. Now, from the time that interview happened there with Melody and Mr. Dixon was arrested, Mr. Dixon stayed in state's custody from that point forward, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So he and Melody did not have a chance to converse after that point, correct? To your knowledge?
To my knowledge.
They did not, to your knowledge, correct?
To my knowledge, yes.
And the last thing I want to talk to you about is you saw when he had his interview, I believe it was with Detective Downs. Detective Downs asked him if he was sad. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And he answered that he was in the affirmative, correct?
Yes.
And when asked why he was sad, he didn't say he was sad because he'd been caught, right?
Correct.
And he didn't say he was sad because his life was over or he was going to be in trouble or anything like that, correct?
Correct.
In fact, he didn't say that he was sad for any reason involving himself, right?
Correct.
In fact, the only thing he said he was sad about was, quote, now he's gone, right?
Yes.
Him being Mr. Whitaker, correct?
Correct.
Nothing further this time. Thank you, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Melodies.
The last video that we watched was Melody's interview that you conducted at the Frank Specie house. When did that happen in relation to the interview you conducted, the first interview you conducted with Mike Dixon?
The first interview, it's actually just prior. Just prior to the first interview with Mike Dixon. So it's at the same residence.
Okay, so the first Dixon that you interview is Melody Dixon?
Correct.
And then subsequently a Michael Dixon at the Frank Specie house?
Correct.
And then the subsequent interviews at the Hocking County Sheriff's Office?
That is correct.
I'm calling it an interview. Is it an interrogation or is it an interview?
I'm going to call it an interview.
Okay. Is it because you're trying to learn what happened?
Yes, an interrogation to me means something totally different. If we had additional evidence at the time, then you could have called it an interrogation.
You were asked a lot of questions about what is usual and not usual, what is consistent and what is inconsistent. Is Michael Dixon's story consistent?
No, it's not.
Okay. Is his story consistent from the first interview to the second interview?
No, it is not.
Is his story consistent from the beginning of the second interview to the end of the second interview?
No, it is not.
Is his story consistent from the second interview to the third interview?
No.
Okay.
Details constantly change, as well as it does not support the evidence.
And just to clarify, right now, according to these interviews, how many guns are being used in the commission of this homicide of James Whitaker?
At the end, there's 2 guns that are involved.
Right now, though, sir, at the conclusion of this first day of interviews with Michael Dixon, how many weapons are involved?
At the conclusion,
The videos that we've seen today, the interview with Ed Downs that concluded at 10 o'clock at night on July 27th, how many guns?
there's only 1.
And does he later then say there's actually another gun?
Yes, he does.
In fact, was there even a struggle over this James Whitaker gun?
No, there was not.
Was the Remington 1100 the firearm?
No, it was not. A Winchester 1400.
So is that consistent with Michael Dixon's story?
No, it is not.
You were asked of whether or not Michael Dixon was consistent with Melody not participating. Is it consistent with the evidence at the scene that a 150-pound man can remove the dead body of a 220-pound man
Objection.
through that house without himself, by himself?
Objection.
Approach.
Mr. Kinneer, did you visit the inside of the Jim Whitaker residence?
Yes, I did.
Did you have to navigate through those hallways?
Yes, this residence appears to be that of a hoarder.
Did you have to walk past all of those items that were hoarded?
Yes,
Okay. Did you see the black deer sled that was recovered at the scene?
yes,
Knowing what you know about the sled and that residence, would you alone have been able, and you're individually been able to move that body yourself, do you think?
I believe that it would be extremely difficult for myself to do it through that, as well as the evidence that we have at the scene at the time, today.
You were also asked a number of questions about what is usual and not usual under the circumstances. Excuse me. Strike that. You were asked a question about Melody and whether she would be in fear that she could get in trouble. When you were interviewing Melody, was she suspected of any crime?
No, not at that time.
Now, if an individual is held against their will and threatened, would she be accused of any crime for those acts?
No,
So Melody Dixon didn't have anything to be afraid of when you were interviewing her, if that was the story. Is that right?
that is correct.
You were asked a few questions about what is usual and not usual. Specifically, that if it is unusual for someone who has a warrant to stay away from the sheriff's office, is it also unusual for someone who has shot and killed someone to stay away from the sheriff's office?
Yes, it is.
Is it also usual for someone who's accused of a crime to initially deny committing the crime?
Initially, yes.
Upon further interview, is it usual sometimes for a person accused of a crime who initially denies it, then to provide some information, but to minimize their conduct?
That would be a normal reaction, to always try to minimize your involvement.
According to the evidence in this case and the interviews we just heard with you and Michael Dixon, was Michael Dixon minimizing his participation in this crime?
Yes.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Recross.
Just a few, Your Honor. Detective, you were just asked about whether you could have dragged a body through that house on a sled. Do you remember that?
Yes.
I can only imagine you don't have much experience dragging prone bodies with a sled.
No, I'm only referring to dead weight, I'd like to say.
Okay. So you're just purely guessing as to whether or not you could have done this, correct?
Yes, but I'd like to say that I have drug my share of deer out of the fields,
Okay.
out of the hillsides. So I know what it's like.
And forgive me, but it sounded like you said that it's fairly typical for a person to initially deny and then later admit to a crime. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And I know you've been talking about the evidence, but you weren't present on the date that Mr. Whitaker died, correct?
No, I was not.
Okay. So you didn't see what happened, correct?
No, I did not.
Okay. So any conclusions that you've made is purely speculative at this point, correct?
Based on the evidence that I know.
Right. But it's only speculation at this point, correct?
I know the evidence is inconsistent with the statement that Mr. Dixon has given for the explanation of how the homicide occurred.
Yeah, but you didn't directly see anything that happened, correct?
No, I did not.
Okay. Nothing further. Thank you.
Redirect.
No, sir. Thank you.
All right, you may step down. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honor.
At this point, we'll take a break and we'll be back at 25 till. As I've told you repeatedly, do not discuss the case among yourselves. Do not permit anybody to discuss it with you or in your presence. It is your duty not to form or express any opinion on the case until it is finally submitted to you. Thank you.